and create big yards after the catch on opportunities closer to the line of scrimmage. And John Gruden has already said he wants to get Ruggs involved as a lot more than just a deep threat this season. Ultimately, we're spending a double-digit round pick on the first receiver off the board in 2020. His disappointing 10% target share and 43 targets as a rookie can only improve dramatically this season, and we could see him as the number 2 option behind Waller and ahead of John Brown. What if I told you T. Higgins was 12th in targets in the 9 games he played with Joe Burrow under center last year? Or that he was the wide receiver 20 over that stretch? Yeah, Higgins was crushing his rookie season and was on a 16-game pace of 80 receptions, 1,206 yards, and 8 touchdowns before Burrow went down in Week 11 and was replaced by the likes of Brandon Allen and Ryan Finley, who were both disastrous. Higgins was the wide receiver 41 in the games those guys started, and what could have been an insane rookie season ended as an impressive one but left much to be desired. Now Joe Burrow is seemingly healthy, with both him and Higgins entering their second year with some experience under their belts. And while Jamar Chase is an insane talent, we can't ignore that A.J. Green was targeted over 100 times last season and is out of Cincinnati. Actually, Higgins, Green, and Tyler Boyd were pacing season target totals of 117, 124, and 144 respectively before Burrow went down. Burrow is a talented young quarterback who can support more than one strong wide receiver season, as evidenced by last year, and will likely have to throw a lot again this year, with Cincinnati's defense likely being mediocre at best. Burrow averaged more than 40 pass attempts per game through the first 11 weeks, where all 3 of his starting receivers were top 20 in targets, while Higgins earned a target share north of 20%, so you get the point. Oh, and did I mention no receiver saw more deep ball targets than Higgins with Burrow under center, even though he only caught 6 of those 22 looks. There's a ton of room for improvement there, though, even if Jamar Chase has an impressive rookie campaign. Higgins has a 45 ADP on Underdog as the 22nd receiver off the board, and honestly, I'm okay with it. But you can no doubt get him a lot later on other sites where Chase is going a lot earlier than Higgins. Chase Claypool was the wide receiver 22 last season, finishing the year with 62 receptions for 873 yards and 9 touchdowns on 109 targets. He also rushed 10 times for 16 yards and 2 scores. He had a few monster games as a rookie and was targeted 8+ times in 7 of his last 10 games. Granted, Ben Roethlisberger was forced to throw a ton in 2020 thanks to an awful offensive line that couldn't generate anything in the run game, and a lead running back in James Conner who was banged up for most of the year. And now the Steelers drafted Najee Harris in the first round to hopefully solve some of those problems. But that doesn't take away from the fact that Pittsburgh has a history of drafting elite receivers. And if Claypool's rookie season was any indication, he could certainly be one of them. Now, I understand Claypool had plenty of bad games, and a lot of his season totals were buoyed by a 4-touchdown game in Week 5 against Philadelphia. But 72 touches and 11 touchdowns as a rookie, despite playing only 62% of snaps, can't be overlooked. And of the 32 receivers with at least 100 targets, Claypool was 10th in yards per reception and 6th in yards after catch per reception. It's only reasonable to assume that Claypool is on the field a lot more in year 2, especially considering he possesses the speed and size to be competitive anywhere on the gridiron. And while there have been some concerns about Ben Roethlisberger falling off for a while now, he still supported not 2, but 3 top 22 receivers last year. Given that Juju Smith-Schuster will likely be the wide receiver 3 this season, and Claypool has the skill set to perfectly complement the smaller Deontay Johnson, it's hard not to feel good about him as the wide receiver 28 on Underdog. 1,000+ yards and double-digit touchdowns is hardly out of the question here. And time for an honorable mention. I really wanted to feature Brandon Ayuk in this video, but a few things concern me. George Kittle and Deebo Samuel played a combined 15 games last year, and with Raheem Mostert healthy and Trey Sermon in the backfield, the run game should look a lot more like it did in 2019, where only the Ravens averaged more yards per game. I'm still high on the 25th overall pick from 2020 and could absolutely see him having a big year, but all of those factors could end up derailing some of that progress we saw from late 2020. A couple of other names to throw out there quickly. Laviska Shenault. 78 ADP is just a little bit too high for me. I think he
It is the Awesemo MLB Strategy Show. I'm doing a show with Adam for the first time in a little bit, and we got a lot to talk about today because there's an early slate, there's a main slate, as is usually the case with Saturday, but 15 games in total. But first, Adam, how you been doing over the last week?
DFS wise, really, really shitty. But other than that, doing pretty well. Glad to be doing shows with you again. Welcome back.
Yeah, it's a lot going on. I didn't even know that Tom Brady NFTs were going to exist the last time we did a show together, and that's kind of consumed my life since then. So that's where we're at. Today's slate, we've got a lot of interesting stuff going on. The return of Chris Sale. So the Red Sox looking a little bit different today. Also, a couple games where we don't have the pitchers yet, but let's just jump into the early slate here. First game, it is going to be Matt Moore on the mound for the Phillies, and then on the other side, Luis Castillo for the Reds. Matt Moore has been one of the worst starting pitchers in baseball for quite some time now. One thing that really stands out to me, very weird pricing here. Matt Moore, 7,500 on DK. He's one of the most expensive starting pitchers on the early slate. But what are you doing with red stacks here? Because Matt Moore targeting him is usually a good way to go.
Yeah, he's not very good, like you said. And right now, Cincinnati's actually projected to be a bit under-owned because you also have Boston on this slate with a 6.5 implied run total, pulling tons and tons of ownership. So the way it looks right now, the Reds actually look great to me. Like you said, Matt Moore gives up a lot of power. He's not a good pitcher overall. And then an even better thing with Matt Moore is that he gives up power to everyone. For his whole career, or at least, since the very beginning when he was actually good, he's given up power to lefties, just like he's given up power to righties. So it's not even like you have to downgrade guys like Joey Votto or Jesse Winker if he's in the lineup. They're going to look really good as well. Definitely, keeping an eye on Winker because he was a late scratch yesterday. But if he's in, he's a spot where, he's expensive, but still a really, really good play. Castellanos, Tyler Stevenson, Jonathan India, Suarez, Aquino, like this lineup has power top to bottom. And it's a good hitter's park. It's a bad pitcher in Moore, who has allowed a 257 expected ISO to lefties, 193 to righties this year. I love the way the Cincy stack looks right now.
Yeah, and it's crazy to me that they're not picking up more ownership for a couple of reasons. Number one, like I said before, just the pricing is a little wonky in this game. In fact, the Matt Moore 7,500 on DK. But then also, we've seen almost every single Matt Moore start this year. The offense he's gone up against has been crazy high owned. Not the case today with the Reds, where they're projected to be the most under-owned stack on the entire DraftKings slate today. And then also, it's not like we have that much pitching that we need to pay up for anyway. So to me, the Reds look like the number one team to target here right off the bat. But on the other side of the game, Luis Castillo, tough matchup for him against the Phillies. But with Castillo, there's still upside in him. He's been inconsistent this year. Tough matchup. But Luis Castillo, I think one of the things that really has to be appealing about him here is that we don't have very many good pitching options here. So Luis Castillo, what do you make of his matchup against the Phillies?
Yeah, the way it looks right now, I think he's a good tournament play. We have more ownership going to Chris Sale, more ownership going to Max Fried, more ownership going to Zach Thompson at a different price point. But amongst those pay-up guys, you have more ownership going to those two. So Castillo's a little bit lower. He has a 28% chance of being a top two pitcher, only getting about 19% ownership. So it is a dangerous matchup. It's a dangerous park. But Castillo is still a good pitcher. We've seen the strikeout numbers come down a bit overall this season, but they have trended up lately. He's coming off of an awful start his last time out. But, I still think he's a talented pitcher. He has good stuff. And on a slate this size where pitching's not great, I do like rolling dice on him as long as the ownership stays low.
Yeah, and one thing that's good is, like you said, he got off to a really slow start this year, and so his overall numbers look down. But since the All-Star break, he's pitched 28 in the third innings. He has 34 strikeouts. So he has induced more swing and misses over the last month or so. That's an encouraging sign for Luis Castillo. He still has really good stuff. He throws the ball really hard. So it's not like he's some guy who's seen some crazy drop off in velocity. His average fastball velocity for his career, 96.7 miles per hour. This year, 97.2. So I'm not massively concerned about the dip in strikeout rate just because the velocity is still there and we have seen a trend back up recently. The matchup obviously is far from ideal, but relative to the other options on the slate, Luis Castillo is a pretty high priority GPP play for me. But on the other side, what are we going to do with the Phillies here? Because as we said that, Luis Castillo has pitched a little bit better as of late, but he's still been a volatile pitcher this year. So are the Phillies a team that you're looking to stack against him?
So I like the idea just because Castillo is going to get some ownership. It's a hitter's park. The Phillies have good hitters. What's holding me up is that they are projected for quite a bit of ownership right now. And then I also am interested to see what this lineup looks like because we had JT Realmuto not play 2 games ago. Then he was questionable to play yesterday. He ended up playing. But now you have an afternoon game after their night game. Is Realmuto going to be in the lineup or not? And that makes a difference when you're already missing Rhys Hoskins. If you put Andrew Knapp in there, this lineup just gets a lot thinner. So curious to see what the lineup looks like. Curious to see exactly where ownership does end up going. But the way it looks right now, I think they just end up being a little bit overowned because they are so cheap. You know, they have a reasonably high 4.5 implied run total. They have good hitters that have power like Harper and Segura and McCutchen and Miller. All these guys can do damage. But with the exception of Harper, they're all just so cheap. Realmuto at 4,300, Segura 37, McCutchen at 33, Miller 2,900. Those are guys that are just going to show up in optimizers a lot. And it's probably going to make them, end up overowned, which is another reason I think to target Castillo in tournaments as well.
Yeah, it's and also, I mean, if you look at our top pitchers tool, he is one of the most underowned pitchers on the slate. And one of the other reasons is because the pitcher we're talking about in the next game here, Chris Sale for the Red Sox, is picking up a ton of ownership. And I understand why. There's a lot of name value with Chris Sale. I don't know what to expect from him, though. I know he pitched fairly well just in terms of what his numbers were in the minor leagues. But what is your expectation for Chris Sale, both today in terms of pitch count and then going forward the rest of the year?
Yeah, so in his most recent appearance in the minors, it was August 7th. He went 4 2/3, struck out 8, walked 3. So that I haven't seen a pitch total, but if you're striking out 8 and walking 3 over 4 2/3, I assume he threw something like 70, 75 pitches. So I would guess that you're getting like 85, 90 pitches from him here. I haven't seen anything official there. Maybe we'll get something throughout the day, or maybe it's already out there and I've just missed it. But so according to the blurb on DraftKings, he threw more than 80 pitches during his rehab start. So I think he should be fine as far as workload goes. I wouldn't be surprised, though, if the Red Sox have a short leash on him. If everything's not looking perfect and he puts a couple guys on base, do they just, kind of get him out of there? That would be the biggest risk, I think. With the ownership he's getting, I'm definitely concerned because there's a very wide range of outcomes here, but at the same time, it's a 5-game slate. It's Chris Sale. He's in a pretty good spot against the Orioles. If he were, it's just a weird spot because if he were lower owned, you would just say screw it, I'm playing a ton of Chris Sale. If he were higher owned, you would probably stay away. So I guess he's kind of just owned where he should be.
Yeah, and also because of the ownership, I'm kind of inclined to stack the Orioles. I mean, I know that Chris Sale has obviously been a great pitcher for most of his career. However, I don't know if it was injury related. That was probably part of it. But the last time he pitched in the big leagues, it's not like he was his normal self. Chris Sale, last time we saw him, 2019, his velocity was way down, 93.5 average fastball velocity. Compared to his years before that, he was at 95.4, 94.9. So last time we saw Chris Sale, his velocity was down quite a bit. And then his numbers, 4.4 ERA, 3.45 expected ERA. The strikeout numbers were still obviously great. So no matter what, I think the fantasy upside is there. But I think I want to play both sides of this. Number one, because Chris Sale is just going to be so popular on the slate. Then number two, he's been off for a while, and it's not like he was particularly dominant the last time we saw him.
Yeah, same boat for me. It's just a situation where it's a 5-game slate. You have half the field rostering a pitcher that is at least somewhat of a question mark. And the Orioles themselves are also projected to go under-owned. They have a 6% chance of being the top stack. They're only getting about 2% aggregate ownership right now. No Ryan Mountcastle still, which hurts their offense. But Mullins, Hayes, Mancini, Santander, Severino, these guys all have some power. Hitting in Fenway is reasonably good. So I do like them in larger field tournaments. But if I had to just choose one side here, I'm going Sale.
Yeah, and then one other thing I'll add about Chris Sale, just because somebody asked us a question about FanDuel and the pricing there, and if we talk about that also, which we hit on that. Generally focus a little more on DraftKings, just because I think a little more people that watch our shows typically play DK than FanDuel, but we usually address both of them.
Also, one of our hosts typically plays way more DK than FanDuel.
Yeah, that as well. But Chris Sale, 10,500 on FanDuel. Once again, small slate, so it's hard to just write him off. I'm a little concerned about his ability to pick up the quality start and the win bonus on FanDuel, just because I don't know if he's going to be able to make it through 5 innings. So for that reason, I think he's a little more desirable on DK than he is on FanDuel. But once again, just because of the size of the slate, I think Chris Sale is in play, but I also want to be overweight to the Orioles just because I think there is so much uncertainty with Chris Sale coming back from injury. So we've only talked about 2 games so far, but I think my 2 favorite stacks on the slate are going to be the Reds and the Orioles, just based on the information we have right now.
Yeah, I think that seems reasonable. One other thing to mention with Sale on FanDuel, though, is that he is getting much less ownership right now. 35% going to Thompson, 24% going to Fried. So I agree that there's certainly a risk that they just, pull him at 5 innings or whatever. But I think there's still a good enough chance that he, can go 6 innings and 85 or 90 pitches. And at 11%, getting Chris Sale, I guess the way I'm looking at it is we're going to have a lot more information about exactly what Chris Sale is after this start, right? And there's going to be a lot of times that after the start, you look back and go like, holy shit, Chris Sale was 11% on FanDuel and I didn't play him here. Like, what was I doing? So I do think that at that low ownership, I'm willing to take the risks there. It's kind of just like the complete opposite as DraftKings.
Yeah, it's there's definitely a big gap in ownership, like at a crazy level. So we'll see where some of that ownership ends up settling as we get closer to lock. Obviously, this is a slate that doesn't lock for 5 hours now, so there's a little bit of time. The data is going to change from now. One thing that I don't expect to change, though, is the Boston Red Sox are going to be massively popular yet again today. They're projected for 28.4% ownership as a team on FanDuel. Over on DK, they're also projected for over 20% ownership. Listen, on paper, this is clearly a terrific spot for Boston. Jorge Lopez is going to be on the mound for Baltimore. We've talked about him, even though he's not good, he's not quite the train wreck that some more other Orioles pitchers are. It's clearly a good spot for Boston. It's just more ownership than I'm really comfortable with.
Yeah, like Jorge Lopez isn't bad, I don't think, especially when Jorge Lopez gets in trouble. It's typically the third time through the order. He's just kind of legitimately good the first couple times through. I mean, the guy throws upper 90s. He's got good breaking stuff. His ERA this year is deceiving. He's got like a 5.75 ERA, only a 4.5 xFIP. He's had, home run issues. I'm not saying he's a great pitcher by any stretch, but I think he's more of just kind of like an average pitcher in terms of the results you can expect. I think he has above average stuff. It's just a matter of him not always being able to go deep enough into games. But the point being, like, I don't look at this as, when they were facing Spencer Watkins yesterday, and it was just like, how do they possibly like not have a big game here? It wouldn't be surprising at all if Jorge Lopez puts together a solid start. We just saw him do it against the Yankees. We just saw him do it against Tampa Bay. He certainly can do it again against Boston. I'm not saying it's a bad spot for Boston. They still are, I think, clearly the most likely team, the highest top stack percentage, and they deserve that. But I just don't think that they deserve all of the ownership that they're getting when this is, a pitcher that I think is decent. The Orioles bullpen, bad for sure. And they certainly can get to Jorge Lopez. So, it is a really high upside spot, but I don't know. I don't think Jorge Lopez is a worse pitcher than Matt Moore, for one. I think, the Red Sox offense is probably better than Cincy's, but I just kind of don't like this spot quite as much as the field does.
Yeah. And I mean, these are spots that basically anybody who's doing shows on our YouTube channel are going to feel the same about this spot. Nobody thinks it's a bad spot for the Boston Red Sox. We have them with the highest projected top stack odds on the slate, but it's just is a team that has a 21% chance to be the top scoring team on the slate. Are they worth being owned in 28 to 29% of the field's lineups? The answer is no. So just by that fact, I'm going to be underweight to the field. So Boston, I think the way I'm going to most likely utilize them is as one-offs in some less popular stacks. Like we talked about the Orioles before. I think they're a good contrarian stack. The Reds, they're going a little bit under-owned. So I'm going to make 5-man stacks of those teams and mix in 1 or 2 Boston bats. That's the way that I really prefer to get my exposure to Boston here. But one more question I'm going to ask you about Lopez before we move on. Our data on him is relatively favorable. We do have him with the worst odds on the slate of being a top 2 pitcher, but with that in mind, that's 10.8% chance of being one of the top 2 scoring pitchers on the slate. He has a 27.5% chance of being one of the top 2 value pitchers on the slate. So only 1% ownership. Are you at all willing to get to Jorge Lopez in tournaments?
Large field tournaments, I think it's doable because, again, there's only 10 pitchers on the slate and you're also just getting massive leverage. If Jorge Lopez gives you another 6-inning start where, he scores 15 to 20 fantasy points, there's a good chance that those really popular Red Sox stacks are disappointing as well. So it's certainly not someone that I'm going into the slate saying, oh, I think the way you make money is just jam in tons of Jorge Lopez. But across 150 lineups on a slate where the pitching isn't that great here, I do like the idea of mixing him in where you don't have the Red Sox. Yeah. On DraftKings only, not on FanDuel.
Yeah. For FanDuel, I think there's no reason to. But Jorge Lopez, just because of the price point, we need to roster 2 starting pitchers. That end, it's a slate where it is kind of hard to find pitchers that I actually like. And some of the ones that are popular that are cheaper, I really don't like all that much. Guys, we're going to talk about later. It's like, I don't know if I want to play 22% on Zach Davies. I don't think his range of outcomes is all that much different from Jorge Lopez. So some guys we'll be talking about later. But next game here, it is the Washington Nationals against the Atlanta Braves. Patrick Corbin on the mound for Washington, Max Fried for Atlanta. So starting with Fried, he is going to be really popular. Here's how I view him compared to Chris Sale. I think he's a lot safer but I don't think he has nearly the same ceiling that Chris Sale has. Max Fried, who's pitched a little bit better as of late, but hasn't been nearly as good this year as he was last year. Obviously, a really easy matchup against the Washington Nationals, who have Josh Bell, they have Juan Soto, and then basically replacement level players around them. So Max Fried, where do you stand at him, who's currently going to be in about half the field's lineups?
Really good spot against Washington. That's the thing that it really keeps coming back to for me is, I think Fried is a good pitcher. I don't think he's great. He has a 24% strikeout percentage this year, 3.75 xFIP, just shy of a home run per 9 innings. Strikeout numbers are a little bit better against lefties, as you would expect, at 26.5%, righties at 23.4, but only a 143 expected ISO, 307 expected WOBA to righties. He's just a pretty good pitcher, and he's facing guys that he's just better than. Juan Soto and Josh Bell are good. Other than that, this is a AAA team, basically. So, Max Fried's a good major league pitcher. Now, essentially, he gets to go back to AAA and pitch against those guys. So I think it sets up as a really good spot for Fried. You don't have the uncertainty in terms of what is he, like you do with Chris Sale. The ceiling, like you said, definitely is not as high, because if we get peak Chris Sale, he's far and away a better pitcher than Max Fried. But I think I hate saying like the floor isn't as low, because the floor on pitchers is pretty much always 0 or negative. But I think that, like, you also know what Max Fried is. Like, there's some chance that Chris Sale comes out and it's just like, oh no, this guy is still not back. That's not going to be the case with Fried. So I think the range of outcomes is a little bit tighter on Fried than it is on Sale. Ownership is similar, so I don't really feel strongly one way or the other between the two, especially because you get a little bit of a price difference as well. But I do think that they both deserve the massive amounts of ownership that they're getting.
Yeah, and by the way, some people in the YouTube chat, I see people asking about the weather concerns here. A couple things. First, the game doesn't start for 7 hours, so it's a little far in advance to know the weather. But at least right now, using my trusty weather source, which is google.com, it doesn't seem to be all that concerning. Not that there's zero risk of rain, except we're looking at 28% chance of rain during the game, which is something I can't totally ignore, except it's not something either that's going to make me massively change my outlook on a game 7 hours before it starts. So if the weather starts to look worse as the day goes on, then okay, yeah, that'll be something to consider. Right now, though, it's not something that's a massive issue for me. So keep an eye on it. But right now, it's not something I'd say like, oh, we have to avoid this game. So that's where I stand on it right now. But other side of the game, Patrick Corbin, he appears to be very sharply on the decline. Over the age of 30 now, Patrick Corbin has never thrown all that hard. And so can't really say it's a massive dip in velocity, because he's always been a guy who's actually his velocity kind of went up a little bit this year. I didn't realize that. But either way, he's never been a hard thrower, but it's really the numbers this year for Patrick Corbin are so poor. 5.83 ERA, 5.8 expected ERA. He's getting paid a bunch of money. There's still some name value here, but I think Patrick Corbin's washed, and I never really have an issue stacking against him.
I love the Braves here. I've said it, I think, every time they've hit probably since the trade deadline, but they've just added so much power to this lineup. And then you get a pitcher in Corbin that has only struck out 16.5% of right-handed hitters this year. He's allowed a 233 expected ISO, 378 expected WOBA, 2 righties. And now he's going up against a lineup that, with the exception of Freddie Freeman, who's really good anyway, and maybe Jock Peterson, the entire lineup is just right-handed power. Albies has power. Soler, Riley, Swanson, Duvall, Travis d'Arnaud. These guys all hit for power, and Corbin's going to be letting them put the ball in play. I love the spot for Atlanta. The ownership looks like right now it's projected to come in about where it should be, but when you compare that to Boston being drastically overowned at the top, we already talked about really liking Cincy, liking Baltimore as leverage. I'm still getting to Atlanta here, because I think that the ownership looks better on them than it does on a lot of the teams around them in terms of top stack percentage.
Yeah, in terms of right now, if I was to rate out the teams in terms of my priority stacking them, it's going to be Reds 1, Orioles 2, and then Braves 3 right now. I agree with you. I really like the spot for the Braves. They have pretty good odds of being the overall top scoring team on the slate, and they're about appropriately to a little bit underowned right now. So I certainly prefer getting to them than a team like the Red Sox, who are picking up, about double the ownership. So yeah, I totally agree. I'm on board with them. And to address one question we have here in the YouTube chat, Eric Alvarez had asked, what's the best way to find the projected ownership for both FanDuel and DK? Well, I have good news for you, because over at Awesemo.com, our projected ownership for the main slate is free today, not for the early slate. For the main slate, if you head on over to Awesemo.com, you will see that we do have our ownership projections up for free. So that is an easy way to find out for free over at Awesemo. Next game we have here on the slate, it is Zach Thompson on the mound for the Marlins going up against Zach Davies. 2 awful offenses, but as we saw last night, that doesn't mean they're not capable of putting runs up on the board. So Zach Thompson is a pitcher I'm a little bit lower on than you. I think we found out over the last couple of months as we've talked about him a handful of times. But what are you going to be doing with Zach Thompson? 60% owned on DK. On paper, I do think that he's clearly the best points per dollar cheap pitching option on the slate, but he is picking up a whole bunch of ownership.
Yeah, I think it's a pretty tough spot because, like you said, the salary is really, really cheap. It's a good matchup against the Cubs. He has come back to earth a bit recently, but at the same time, he's faced San Diego twice in that stretch, faced the Mets, actually had a decent start against the Yankees. So, I think partly it's that even though I think he's better than his early minor league numbers, he probably just isn't as good as his early major league numbers. So I think that's part of it, but also, it was difficult matchups. And then now he's facing the Cubs. I'd be more concerned if he was putting up starts like that, against the Rockies outside of Coors and then against this Cubs team and the Nats or something, than against, a couple of the best offenses in baseball. So the big thing for me is that the price tag came down. So I think he is a really, really good point per dollar option. Where it really comes down to, though, is the ownership, because for one, is it really going to be that necessary to pay down for a pitcher on DraftKings? I haven't made lineups yet, so I don't know the answer. Typically, the hitter pricing has been weak enough that you don't really need to, but with this only being a slate that has 10 offenses, we know the Reds are pretty expensive. We know the Red Sox are pretty expensive. The Braves are, kind of middle of the pack in pricing. So maybe you do need to use Thompson a little bit more. I think he's a good play. I don't think he should be 62 times as owned as Jorge Lopez or, God, that Willie Peralta is the next thing I have to say, or, 31 times as owned as Peralta. This is why he's getting the ownership is, there's nowhere else to go really. But it's just a spot where I would anticipate that I get like around the field on him, because I think he's assuming that the price is necessary. I think he is far and away the best option out of the cheap pitchers, but at the same time, it's baseball. And this is a relatively unproven pitcher getting rostered by like 2/3 of the field.
Yeah, that's the issue. It's a whole lot of ownership, and it's for a guy who's a career minor leaguer. He's an unheralded prospect. He's 27 years old. He didn't even have good results in the minor leagues recently, and he does have a 3.09 ERA in the big leagues this year, but a 4.03 expected ERA, 4.53 xFIP. So I do think he's been pitching a little bit over his head. The strikeout numbers have looked decent for him. The price point is good. I just don't want to get as much of him as the field does. That's really where I'm at here. He's picking up a whole bunch of ownership. So if he's going to remain 60% owned, I'd prefer to be underweight to field and get a little bit of exposure to the Cubs just for leverage purposes. But it's kind of hard to love the Cubs at this point of the season. But, small slate and they're going up against a pitcher who might not be that good. That's picking up 60% ownership. So where do you stand on the Cubs?
Yeah, I'm there with you. They have the second lowest top stack percentage, but they're still projected for like half the ownership of their top stack chances, which is nice. And then again, if they do well, you just beat 2/3 of the field that has Zach Thompson. So you're not confident in them. I don't think they would be a 3-max team for me. The way it looks right now, I probably would be going Cincinnati, Atlanta, and Baltimore in 3-max. But I do think in large field, the Cubs look like a good stack just because of the ownership that Thompson's pulling.
All right. And then on the other side, Zach Davies is going to be on the mound for the Cubs. Davies, I feel like he's a fairly known entity at this point in his career, somewhere around league average, slightly below league average pitcher. Good matchup for him, but there's just no strikeout upside in Zach Davies. So if you're looking for a cheap SP2, whatever, he's worth being in the mix. But I wouldn't look at Zach Davies and be like, he's a guy I need to get a ton of exposure to, just because I don't really see a realistic path to a massive upside.
Yeah, I agree. The thing is, if you compare him to Zach Thompson and look at the top two pitchers percentage, I think Davies right now actually looks like the better play, even though I don't think he's as good a pitcher. Thompson is basically 1.5 times as likely to be a top 2 pitcher on DraftKings as Zach Davies, but he's getting 3 times the ownership. So even though I like Zach Thompson more as a pitcher, and I would feel better about having Zach Thompson in my lineup than Zach Davies, I think right now between the two, Davies is actually the one going a little bit under-owned, which really is just all you need to say about the pitching on this slate.
Yeah, I think that is a reasonable way to look at it. I'm not dying to roster either of these pitchers at what their ownerships are in general, but if I had to roster one of these guys, I would go with Davies, just because we do have a fairly similar range of outcomes between the two of them, similar price points. The difference being, though, Zach Thompson 60% owned compared to 22% owned for Zach Davies. So yeah, go ahead.
So I think when I build lineups, I think there's a good chance that I end up just like being overweight on all 3 of Sale, Fried, Castillo, and then underweight on Thompson and all of the garbage pitchers below him. Like ideally, that is the route that I would take. I just don't know exactly how affordable that's going to be. Like if I plug in Sale and Fried on DraftKings, it still leaves me almost 4K per position. So yeah, I mean, ideally that's the route that I go, but judging by how much ownership is going to Davies and Thompson, I am guessing they are pretty necessary on this slate from a roster construction standpoint.
All right. And then talking about bad pitchers, Willie Peralta is going to be on the mound for the Detroit Tigers. I know you kind of begrudgingly brought him up as one of the lower owned options. Do you feel like you might get more of the field then, which I mean, I'm going to. He's only projected for 1% ownership. We have him projected for a 12% chance to be a top pitcher. It's not like the Cleveland offense is all that daunting. So do I love Willie Peralta? No, but I'm willing to roster him at more than 1% when we have him with a 12% chance to be a top scoring pitcher on the slate.
Yeah, I have nothing to say as far as this is why Willie Peralta is going to have success. You're just taking a low owned pitcher on a slate where there's some pretty questionable cheap pitchers getting a lot of ownership. You're just taking a low owned pitcher and saying like, man, I hope I get lucky here. That would be really cool. That's pretty much all that's happening. There's no reason that Willie Peralta is going to do well today.
Yeah, it's a small slate. There aren't that many pitching options. One of the other reasons there aren't that many pitching options, Cleveland today, it looks like it's going to be Sam Hentges starting, but he's not somebody who works all that deep into the game. So we've seen him his last couple of outings. He threw 39 pitches, 19 pitches, 17 pitches. Not a confirmed starter, but it looks like it is going to be him. Have you seen anything different? And if not, what do you expect from Hentges in terms of length we're getting out of him?
Haven't seen anything different. I'm expecting him to be in that 2-3 inning range anyway. Or again, he's 8K on DraftKings, so it's a moot point. Like even if we're off and he goes an inning longer than we think, he's 8K. Where I am interested is Logan Allen was recalled from AAA yesterday. He didn't pitch. I'm wondering if they use him as the long guy behind Hentges. God, I hate that name. I can never say it. Allen 6,900 on DraftKings. It wouldn't. Yeah, I mean, it's obviously, especially if they don't confirm that he's going to be the long guy, it's obviously a very, very dart throw type play because he may not even pitch. But that would be kind of interesting to be in large field tournaments at 6,900.
You know, what'd be funny is, so here's a couple of things here. Here's Logan Allen's recent DraftKings outings. Negative 7.9 fantasy points, 7.3, negative 10.6, negative 4.4, negative 1.9, negative fantasy points in 4 of his last 5 outings. There is a lot that has to. Yeah, go ahead.
I'll say, so if you roster him, you might just be hoping he stays in the bullpen.
Well, that's the other thing also. Is it would be funny if you're rostering him, it's like, come on, I hope this guy comes in. Then he finally comes in and scores negative fantasy points. Like that was last night. I felt it with Charlie Morton, who I was pretty high on. I was sweating him like, oh my God, is this game going to play? I need Charlie Morton to play. And then he goes out and he gives up 2 runs immediately in the first inning. He had negative fantasy points. Like, well, what a waste of a night that was. He turned it around after that. But I do feel like there could be a kind of similar type feelings with Logan Allen if he comes into the game. But either way, we're going to need more information on this Cleveland pitching situation to really know what to make of that and what to make of Detroit. So
scratch the Logan Allen thing. He threw 5 innings at AAA yesterday and then was called up after the game, I guess.
Okay. All right. So not going to be him, but yeah, it's still something we need more information on. One thing that's weird about the early slate is a lot of times the Saturday early slates on DK and FanDuel, we have games that are being played at like 12 or 1 o'clock. These are games that are being played at 6 o'clock, only a little bit before the main slate lock. So there's still a whole bunch of time until we get some of these lineups and some more information. So that is going to do it for the early slate. Check out overall all the stuff we have over at Awesemo.com. Because that is going to be the best way to get all of the updated information later on as the slate gets closer. If you guys want to get access to all the Awesemo Plus tools we have for every DFS sport, sign up for an Awesemo Plus Platinum package for a weekly pass. That's $29.95. Or if you're signing up for the first time, use the promo code MLB Strategy Show. That's all one word, all capital letters. They get you 25% off your first week of Awesemo Plus Platinum. And if you're only looking to play MLB DFS, you can sign up for an Awesemo Plus MLB Weekly Pass. That is for $15.95. Stop guessing, start winning. Join Awesemo Plus today. All right, now let's get into this main slate. It is going to be one less game on FanDuel than it is on DK. The main reason being because the first game we have here is a doubleheader, which are not included on FanDuel, but it is on DK. Mitch Keller on the mound for Pittsburgh against Aaron Ashby for Milwaukee. So I don't generally love to roster offenses in these 7-inning games when it's a bigger slate because it's hard to get as much upside when there's less innings. But this is a really good spot for the Brewers against Mitch Keller. So what do you do with this particular spot?
So one quick note, I looked at the Indian stuff a little bit more. The last time that Penkus pitched was on the 9th. In that game, he went 2 innings, 3 other relievers went 2 innings, and then one guy went 1 inning. So unless we get some designated long reliever, just ignore Indians pitching. So here, it's still, I can't get to the Brewers on a 7-inning game on a slate of this size. They're probably going to do really well because I had tons of them last night and got screwed by the rain out. So I'm sure they will rub salt in the wound and score like 22 runs today. But yeah, it's a really good spot against Keller. It's just that it's so difficult to sacrifice, 2 at bats when you have, 18 or 9 other games, 18 other offenses. You're really, really asking for a lot, I think.
Yeah, it's hard to find the upside. If there was a spot where I was going to do it, it would probably be this Milwaukee spot against Mitch Keller, just because Keller's been so terrible over the course of his big league career. Well-regarded prospect. He has good stuff, but honestly didn't even have great results in the minor leagues. This year in AAA, he was decent, 3.21 ERA, 3.02 FIP, but a lot of his minor league numbers back in 2018 in AAA to 4.82 ERA, 3.56 ERA in AAA in 2019. Overall, over the course of his big league career, 6.38 ERA. So that's going to be problematic for him this year. 7.06 ERA, 6.11 expected ERA. So with the Brewers in this spot, I would at least be willing to get to a couple of them over the course of 150 lineups, where I'm more inclined in most situations, just take the 7-inning games out of my player pool. So that's where I'm at here. A little bit of exposure to the Brewers are only project for 0.5% ownership right now. On the other side, Aaron Ashby is going to be on the mound for Milwaukee. I have no interest in the Pirates, but Ashby, at least it is a good spot for him against Pittsburgh.
Yeah, I would guess he's one of my highest owned pitchers. We have him right now with a 0% chance of being a top 2 pitcher. I disagree with that. Hopefully it changes before lock. If it doesn't, I'll be changing it myself. He only went 2 innings his last start, but remember that was a game where they started the game in Wrigley and then the rain rolled in and they went into like an hour rain delay after the 2nd inning. So that wasn't a pitch count thing. That was a weather thing. His start before that at AAA, he went 6 innings. There's no real reason, I don't think, that Ashby isn't giving you at least 4 or 5 innings if he pitches well. He's one of the top pitching prospects in baseball. He's put up great strikeout numbers at AAA, was absolutely awful in his major league debut against the Cubs, looked better in his 2 innings last time out. At AAA this year, a 36% strikeout percentage in 20 total appearances, 11 starts. He's got good strikeout stuff, and he's got a good matchup here against the Pirates. Only 4,900 on DraftKings. I'm going to end up getting a lot of Aaron Ashby, I think.
Yeah, it looks like a very good upside spot for him. Also, the price point is right. I wouldn't consider him on FanDuel at all. No. Well, the game isn't on FanDuel, so definitely another reason to not consider him on FanDuel. But type of pitcher I normally wouldn't consider on FanDuel, but because of the price point on DK, I think he's in play. You mentioned the strikeout stuff. Some people might look at the minor league numbers and be concerned that he has a 4.48 ERA. We look at some of the underlying numbers. 368 BABIP in the minors this year, also a 64.3% strand rate. He's been massively unlucky. So a 2.7 FIP, 2.3 xFIP for him in the minor leagues. Ashby, like you said, really well-regarded pitching prospect. I think that he makes a whole bunch of sense for value right now. I'm curious to see where his ownership winds up because we only have him project for 1% ownership right now. If that is the case, he's a really strong GPP option. So what type of confidence do you have in him in terms of how much exposure, if he was to hold this low of ownership, how many lineups could you see yourself having him in?
Yeah. So one thing, it's a really similar situation to the last time he pitched too, where there was just like kind of uncertainty around him, and he ended up getting like 6.5% ownership. So there were also, weather concerns in that game, but I think there's a pretty good chance that you get relatively low ownership on him here. I did say that I thought he'd be one of my highest owned pitchers. I will preface that with there's a lot of good pitching on the slate. So, and guys in good matchups. So maybe a little bit less of him than like last time. I think I had like 40%, maybe a little bit less of him than that. But I do think if you need to pay down for pitching, he looks really, really good here. He's more talented than John Lester and Jaime Barria and Keller and all these guys that are down there. So where I'm paying down, I expect to get to a lot of Ashby, especially if he ends up being projected for somewhere in like the 5 to 10% ownership range.
All right. The next game here, I'm really confused by some of the ownership here. We have the Oakland A's taking on the Texas Rangers. Very good spot for James Kaprielian, but at 8,500 on FanDuel, he's projected for 15% ownership. On DK, where he is 9,300, Kaprielian is projected for 19.4% ownership. I think he's a fine pitcher, but at this kind of price point, I don't think he warrants this kind of ownership.
Yeah, agreed. I mocked the top 2 pitcher percentage on Ashby and got kicked out of the Awesemo site, so I need to log back in. But Yeah, I think that it's a good spot for Caprillion, but there's a lot of good pitching in good spots on this particular slate. So I think, the ownership probably around where it should be. I think he's got good strikeout stuff. He's facing the Rangers, which is often just, a free pass to fantasy points. But also you have Buehler on the slate. You have Dylan Cease on the slate. You have, tough spot for Cease, but you have Buehler on the slate. You have Musgrove against Arizona. You have Garcia against the Angels. You have some other good spots to go to as well.
So people are saying in the YouTube chat that the Milwaukee game got taken out of the DK slate. I mean, I'm looking at it right now and it's here. So I'm a little, do I have to refresh the contest? Cause I'm looking at it right now. I could screenshot my phone. It has Milwaukee, Pittsburgh here, and Aaron Ashby's in there. So are you guys sure you're not looking at the early slate, not the main slate? Because on the main slate, it's there for me right now, unless something's changed in the last.
It's there for me too. I don't see a banner or anything.
Yeah. So, all right, if something changes, then obviously that'll be something that'll get mentioned later in the day. I'm going to be doing live before lock with Gundacker later. So, like this video, subscribe to the YouTube channel. We're going to be back later with more information. But as of now, my assumption is that the Milwaukee Pittsburgh game is going to be on the slate tonight. So, I like Aaron Ashby at his price point a lot. But that aside, James Kaprielian, a little bit over-owned to me, also a little more than I want to pay for him. There's also a bunch of strong pitching options on the slate. On the other side, Jordan Lyles is going to be going up against Oakland, and Jordan Lyles has been not totally awful this year, but this matchup against Oakland is about as difficult as a spot to get for a pitcher. And Oakland, oddly, not picking up a whole bunch of ownership today. So Oakland is one of the most positively leveraged stacks today on DK. Over on FanDuel, they also look to be a little bit about fairly owned, so it's still in play. But DK, they look like one of the best stacks on the slate. So what are you going to be doing with Oakland today against Lyles?
Yeah, I think I'll get to a lot of them because they just have so much power in their lineup, really from the top to the bottom. Jordan Lyles, not very good. 201 expected ISO to righties this year, 222 to lefties, 366 expected WOBA to lefties, 350 to righties. Just pretty much gives it up to everybody, and tons of power in Oakland's lineup. And also cost isn't really a concern. Not that as a whole, the team isn't that expensive, but $6K Starling Marte, $5,700 Matt Olson, having Aaron Ashby on the slate for $4,900 makes me not really concerned about the price on bats, because I know that I can get a high upside pitcher for close to minimum salary if I want to pay out for bats. So I think Oakland looks really, really good.
Yeah, it's going to be hard for me to avoid Oakland. I actually think if the slate was to lock right now, which obviously it's not, we've got another 7.5 hours until the slate goes. I think Oakland would probably be my most rostered team right now. It's a good spot for them. They also look a little bit under-owned. I haven't seen exactly what the Texas weather is going to be today, except, very favorable hitting conditions. We have temperatures expected to be nearly 100 degrees today, also high humidity. So the ball should be flying out in Texas today. So considering all that information, I really like the spot for the A's offense. And I'm surprised they're not picking up more ownership, especially against a pitcher in Jordan Lyles, who's prone to giving up fly balls and hard contact. So A's, to me, one of the highest upside spots on the slate. Next game here, Walker Buehler against the Mets. Taijuan Walker is going to be on the mound for New York. Taijuan Walker's had all kinds of struggles as of late. But let's start by talking about Walker Buehler, who in terms of pay-up options is in a tier of his own today, because there are not that many pitchers who are in the kind of Cy Young type category. There are good pitchers today, but nobody on Walker Buehler's level. So what are you doing with Walker Buehler? How often are you looking to pay up for him?
Yeah, just really, really good pitching option. Obviously, decent matchup against the Mets. Not a team that I really actively seek out pitchers against, but not a team that I'm going to shy away from either, especially when they're as good as Buehler. Right now, the highest top two pitcher percentage at 30%, getting about 38% ownership. That seems to make sense to me. He is really expensive, but again, that's just not that much of a concern when I can just pair him with Aaron Ashby and still have plenty of money. So I do like Buehler here. I expect to get to a lot of him.
Yeah, and there's so much safety with Buehler. If we look at his recent results, they've been so strong. Last few outings, and a lot of them come again in difficult matchups. Buehler, 6 innings, 1 run, 6 innings, 1 run, 7 innings, no runs, 7 1/3 innings, 1 run, 7 innings, 2 runs, 6 innings, no runs. In those games, 2 of them came against the Giants, 1 came against Houston, 1 came in Coors Field against the Rockies. So I think Walker Buehler brings the most upside and the most floor of any pitcher on the slate. So no reason to stack the Mets, in my opinion. Walker Buehler, not really too much to add. He's the safest pitching option on the slate. If you have the salary in your lineup, pay up for Walker Buehler. He's also the number 1 overall cash option on this slate, in my opinion, as well. But Other side, Taijuan Walker, who's had all kinds of struggles for the Mets recently. He's going to be going up against this Dodgers offense, which is just so loaded right now. From top to bottom, it's filled with danger and power hitters all throughout. So the Dodgers, to me, they're picking up about a fair amount of ownership. So I'm looking to be about even with the field. Dodgers right around 8% projected ownership, 8% chance to be a top stack. Where do you stand with the Dodgers?
I think they look good. I mean, Taijuan Walker, we knew he was in line for some regression after his start early in the season, but it seems like there's a little bit more to it than that as well. I mean, he's just giving up home run after home run after home run right now. He's given up 10 home runs over his last 3 starts, 3, 2, 2, and 3 against Toronto, Atlanta, Miami, and Philly. 3 of those offenses are good, but so are the Dodgers. I think it's a really high upside spot for the Dodgers. And again, the ownership's going to be relatively low because they're expensive and there's some good value stacks in pretty good spots today as well. But it just makes me want to get to teams like this where I know I can save some money on my SP2, get up to Trey Turner, get Max Muncy, going a little bit under owned, but about where they should be, like you said. So I think Oakland looks a little bit better than the Dodgers do, but I still like the Dodgers quite a bit.
Yeah, and to me, I think the key here with Taijuan Walker is the Mets are so bad at handling injuries. That's the reason that Jacob deGrom isn't pitching right now, is that he had some arm issues earlier in the year, and the Mets are like, hey, we don't see anything terrible on the MRI. Let's just have him pitch until his arm falls off. And then, hey, guess what? His arm kind of fell off, and now the Mets are without arguably the best player in baseball for the first stretch of the season. Taijuan Walker earlier in the year, he was pitching through a back injury. The Mets said, could you keep pitching? And he said, yes, because he's an athlete. And Taijuan Walker, they didn't allow him to swing when he was batting, though. So pitchers just throw fastballs right down the middle. He would stand there and take them. And now we're getting to a point where Taijuan Walker's regressed in a big way. And I think it's probably because he pitched through an injury earlier in the season and his body's starting to fail him a little bit. So Taijuan Walker, if you look at his overall numbers for the season, I don't think they're really indicative of how much he's struggling as a pitcher. So good spot for the Dodgers. Certainly a team that I'm going to be looking to get to today. Also, that lineup from top to bottom, like I said, just ridiculous. There's not a spot where Walker's going to be getting a break in that lineup.
And also keep in mind that Taijuan Walker is injured at some point in every single season.
Yes, that too. And this season he hasn't missed a lot of starts this year. He's been able to be out on the mound. However, like you said, we've only seen him pitch a total of 15 starts over the last 3 years coming into this year. So we haven't seen him on the mound very often. His velocity is up overall for the year, but regression seems to be hitting him pretty hard right now. So Taijuan Walker does look like a pitcher to target at the moment. Next game we have on the slate here, it is the White Sox against the Yankees. Dylan Cease is going to be on the mound for Chicago, and a guy who both of us have rostered quite a bit this year. He's made remarkable improvements from previous years, formerly one of the top pitching prospects in baseball. And he's really starting to generate some good results, especially in terms of his strikeout numbers. The issue here with Dylan Cease, obviously, is he's going up against this Yankees lineup. So Cease versus the Yankees, which side are you siding with?
Whichever side the field is not. And right now that appears to be the Yankees. When I saw that, Cease was facing the Yankees, my first thought was, oh, this will be a really fun tournament play because people shy away from it. The Yankees do give you strikeout upside. Cease actually has the highest strikeout percentage on this slate. And then I looked at the ownership percentage where right now we have him projected for 31% ownership. The only pitchers getting more on DraftKings are Walker Buehler and Joe Musgrove. If that's going to be the case, one, I want some Yankee stacks. And two, I'll move some of that Cease ownership to guys like Luis Garcia, James Kaprielian, other pitchers. It's just, there's certainly a path to success. He strikes out a lot of guys. He's in a matchup against a team that has a lot of strikeouts in their lineup and is also still missing a couple of their normal hitters with Rizzo and Sanchez out. But if 30% of the field's there, I kind of don't think it's worth it.
Yeah, that's the main issue here. There's so much downside with Dylan Cease, and especially against the Yankees. There's upside as well because Cease generates a lot of strikeouts. The Yankees are a team that is prone to striking out because some of the best hitters in the lineup, Aaron Judge, Giancarlo Stanton, Joey Gallo, these are guys who could swing and miss. But if I have to take one side, it's going to be the Yankees just given the ownership right now. We have the Yankees projected for less than 1% ownership. Dylan Cease right now projected for 32.5% ownership on DK. Over on FanDuel, he's projected to be the most popular pitcher on the entire slate. Dylan Cease, 20% ownership at 8,900 on FanDuel. He's the chalk pitcher of the day. So given the information we have right now, the Yankees look like a really good leverage stack. And whenever you get a team with the kind of power that the Yankees have as a leverage stack, I like the upside that brings. So I think the Yankees are an excellent team to be on. Basically, all the power hitters there are going to be in play. I'm going to be overweight to the Yankees, a little bit underweight to Dylan Cease given his current ownership information. Other side of the game here, Jameson Taillon is going to be on the mound for the Yankees. And Taillon, after a slow start to the year, has pitched much better as of late. In particular, the strikeout stuff has been really good. Another guy, like Dylan sees, in a really tough matchup on the road against Chicago, but is Taillon somebody you're willing to get to because of some of his recent results?
The price tag, I think, is fair at 6,900. The matchup is middle of the road at best. He has been pitching better recently, like you said. The strikeout stuff's been there pretty much all season long. It's just been that he's gotten hit hard in some spots. But the thing is, too, I mean, he's pitched against Kansas City, Baltimore, and Miami in his last 3 starts. He had good starts against Boston twice before that as well. So, I mean, he definitely has picked it up. I think he's underpriced. He's reasonably owned at 14%. Right now, I think I'll probably just end up in that like 15% range with Taillon.
Yeah, it's obviously a tough matchup against Chicago and the White Sox right now in terms of ownership. That's another team that is not really all that popular right now. 1.4% projected ownership on DK for the White Sox. Over on FanDuel, we have the White Sox projected for 1.7% ownership. So the White Sox are a team that I'm looking to be overweight to. I like Taillon as well, just considering where his price point is on DK. But I think both sides are. I wouldn't say high priority plays, but probably both ones that relative to ownership I want to be on.
Yeah, I'm there with you. One other thing working in Taillon's favor is he has done a much better job against right-handed hitters than lefties this year, which isn't surprising. 275 expected WOBA and a 125 expected ISO to righties with a 24.5% strikeout percentage. He's allowed a 329 expected WOBA and 198 expected ISO to lefties with about a 23% strikeout percentage. That, even though the White Sox have a lot of good right-handed hitters, they are at least still right-handed. So it sets up a little bit better than if they had more left-handed power mixed in there.
All right. The next game we have here, this is the game with the highest total on the slate, run total of 10 for the St. Louis Cardinals against the Kansas City Royals. 2 pitchers who are not very good are going to be on the mound. John Lester for St. Louis, Brad Keller for Kansas City. Obviously an excellent spot for both offenses. The issue is that the field is pretty hip to that fact. So as a result, we have a whole bunch of ownership going to St. Louis. They're fairly negatively leveraged. Same goes for KC. Good spots for both of them. I just don't want to be where the field's at.
Yeah, I don't think this game's going to be very fun because I don't think I'm going to have much of it. And I don't respect either of these pitchers. I like the bats on both sides. It's just a matter of these are 2 of the teams that I was referring to earlier where there's really, really cheap teams in good spots with high implied run totals. It's going to be really, really easy for the field to get here. So, long term, I think you do make more money by going to teams like the A's, the Dodgers, some of those more expensive, just better offenses that we've talked about. But there's still going to be a lot of slates where the Cardinals and the Royals just do what they should do against the pitcher that they're facing. And you don't win because they do really well. Individually, like if you're looking in cash games, just, looking for the best plays, Whit Merrifield at 3,600 is, I think, probably one of the best plays on the slate. Salvador Perez is an excellent play at 4,800. One of the highest upside catcher options, pretty much every slate that he's on, but now he gets a great matchup against Lester. Hunter Dozier at only 2,700 has some power against the pitcher that's not going to miss bats. On the other side, if Dylan Carlson's in the lineup, I don't know why he's 2,800. He has some power. He has some speed. That's just too cheap of a price point for him. Tyler O'Neill, 3,300 against a pitcher that doesn't miss bats. For the season, Brad Keller has struck out 15.4% of righties with a 219 expected ISO. Tyler O'Neill hits pretty much everything hard. He just doesn't make contact very often. Keller is going to let him hit the ball, so he looks great. I think there's a lot of top individual plays at their positions from this game. It's just in tournaments, you can mix those guys in. I'm not saying like don't play Whit Merrifield in tournaments. Like that would be crazy. But you want to make sure that you have low owned stacks around them. So typically what ends up happening for me is I'll have a lower owned stack with Whit Merrifield one off or with Merrifield plus Perez, just to keep the total ownership of my lineup down. And then the hope is that those guys do well, or, a couple guys from Kansas City do well, a couple guys from St. Louis do well, but as a full stack, they fail. So, it works out.
Yeah. And I think the key here, and it's something that you said when you were talking about them at the top, is just relative to a team like Oakland, where the A's today, we have projected with a 10.3% chance to be the top scoring team on the slate. That is the second best mark of the night behind just the Houston Astros. The St. Louis Cardinals are projected for an 8.4% chance to be a top stack. So the A's about 20% more likely to be the top scoring team of the day than the Cardinals are. Yet in terms of ownership, the Cardinals are projected for 12.9% ownership as a team compared to 6.4% for Oakland. So Oakland, we have with a fairly significant better chance to be a top scoring team, but only half the ownership. A lot of that is because of price point, where the A's are a little bit more expensive than the Cardinals. But I mean, even with that in mind, there's such a better chance of the A's being the top scoring team relative to ownership. That's a pivot I'm looking to make. Instead of going to the Cardinals bats, I want to be underweight to them going to Oakland. So both sides of this game just look pretty heavily overowned.
One other thing to add to the Whit Merrifield, already being a really good option. John Lester seems like he's gone back to not caring to control the running game. He was someone that for, a lot of his career, you could just run at will. He couldn't even throw the ball to first base. He had gotten better at it over the last few years. But he's allowed 10 stolen bases in 85 and 2/3 innings this year. He allowed 3 in 61 innings last year. He allowed 10 in 171 innings in 2019. This is the first year since 2016 he's graded out as being a negative at controlling the running game. So Yadi Molina might help that now that he's on the Cardinals. But I think, not that you were going to shy away from Merrifield if Lester was still holding runners, but it makes it look even better for him.
This Cardinal staff is just so crappy. Also, one more thing on John Lester. Just terrified to be underweight to the field on the Royals in this spot, even though I think it's the right play to make. But John Lester, his average fastball velocity over the last handful of years went from 93.1 to 91.9, 91.1, 90.7, 89.6, now 89.1. So a clear dip in overall arm talent. And that's going to be the main issue here with John Lester, 37 years old, the reason he's no longer producing results. But yeah, once again, great spot for both offenses. I just don't want to stack them as much as the field does because both of them look fairly negatively leveraged in our top stacks tool right now. 5 games left to talk about on tonight's main slate. The next one is going to be the Minnesota Twins against the Tampa Bay Rays. Michael Wacha is going to be on the mound for Tampa Bay. Minnesota, not a known starting pitcher, at least of the time that we'd started the show. Have you seen a pitcher for the Twins today?
I'm seeing Kenta Maeda.
Okay, so if it's Kenta Maeda, then let's see, where's his price? Because I didn't have him included here.
6,700.
That is a pretty favorable price point for Kenta Maeda. So let's start there with Maeda. Is at that salary, what do you make of him as a play today? Also, he's in our data, not picking up a whole bunch of ownership right now.
Yeah, I'm intrigued by him at only 11 to 12% ownership. It's a very dangerous matchup against Tampa Bay because they do have a ton of power in their lineup, but there's also strikeouts in there. And Kenta Maeda has struck out about 25% of lefties and righties alike this season. And he's really, really cheap. So I'm intrigued. He's another pitcher, I think, where, if you are looking to pay up for bats and maybe you're not trying to play Aaron Ashby in every single lineup where you do, you definitely can go to Kenta Maeda. You can go to Jameson Taillon, who we already talked about. I think a little bit cheaper than he should be for the ceiling. It is a very dangerous spot though, because Tampa has just insane amounts of power.
Yeah, it's one of the better offenses in the American League. A team that, the Tampa Bay Rays, I think coming into the year, they were like, I don't know, minus 150 to miss the playoffs or something like that. But, just once again, the Tampa Bay Rays are always overachieving. On this slate also, even though Kenta Maeda, he's a solid pitcher, numbers for the year, 4.69 ERA, 3.81 expected ERA. He's been a little unlucky with a 3.23 BABIP. But are the Rays a team they're going to be looking to stack against him at all?
The way it looks right now, I think so, because we have them as the 5th highest top stack percentage. Among those top 5, Houston going wildly overowned, St. Louis going wildly overowned, and then you have Oakland, San Diego, and Tampa Bay. So I think, this is another spot. It always feels dumb talking about it and like taking both sides. And I think in 3 max or one lineup, Tampa Bay is probably not my number, my priority. But if you're playing 20 or 150 lineups, I think having Kenta Maeda and having Tampa Bay makes a lot of sense, because while Kenta Maeda does have good strikeout numbers this year and Tampa Bay does strike out a lot, Kenta Maeda has also allowed 1.5 home runs per 9 innings. And Tampa Bay has a lot of power and they're getting outside of Tropicana Field, which is a benefit for them as well. Brandon Lau is really cheap at 4,600. Nelson Cruz is underpriced at 4,600. Ji-Man Choi has a lot of power for a guy at 3,700. It's still a high upside spot for Tampa, even though Kenta Maeda is a decent pitcher.
Yeah, and then on the other side, Michael Wacha, he's had his struggles this year. Yeah, he's irrelevant for DFS, especially because we don't often see him work all that deep into games. But there's so much ownership going to the Twins today, and I don't really understand why. It's obviously a fine spot against Wacha, but the Twins offense isn't particularly daunting now, especially post-trade deadline. But this is a team that's projected to be the 3rd most rostered team on the slate. The Astros being number 1, the Cardinals being number 2, the Twins being number 3. At this kind of ownership, I have no interest in this team.
Yeah, I'm guessing it's just because they're so cheap. I mean, you can stack this team and roster whatever pitching and one-offs you want pretty much. Max Kepler is the only guy in the projected lineup above 4K. I like some of them individually because, again, Waka is just not a very good pitcher. He's allowed a 251 expected ISO to righties this year. $2,900 Miguel Sano has a crazy high ceiling for that salary. Jorge Polanco at 2,900 looks really, really good, even though, he is a lefty. It's still fine. Donaldson at 3,600. But, again, it's just, I think you make more money over the course of a season by not playing drastically over-owned teams, especially when they are middling to below average offenses like Minnesota.
Yeah, so Minnesota, probably my least favorite stack of the main slate. They're over-owned. We're also going to be talking about the Houston Astros later. They're over-owned. At least the Astros have a legitimate chance to be the top-scoring team of the day. It's really hard to see that with the Minnesota Twins. So a spot that's likely going to make or break me tonight, I'm not going to be on Minnesota. Next game on the slate, San Diego Padres in Arizona to take on the Diamondbacks. Here's my statement on Joe Musgrove on the mound. I think he's back, with the caveat that I have been wrong about Joe Musgrove for basically the entirety of the season. There's no pitcher I've had a tougher time nailing down, but over the last 3 starts, we've seen 24 strikeouts to 5 walks for Joe Musgrove. Some have been in easy matchups. He pitched against the Marlins. He pitched against the Rockies. But guess what? He's going up against the Diamondbacks today. It's another easy matchup. So I like him to keep it going. But where are you with Musgrove now?
Yeah, I was going to say my statement on Musgrove is, how did this guy just get like the easiest strength of schedule in Major League history? Every single time he pitches, it's like, well, I have question marks about Musgrove, but not really here because he's facing a AAA team. And that's the case again. He's facing the Diamondbacks in Arizona, perfectly fine place to pitch. Diamondbacks lineup is mostly garbage. Musgrove has been fine. He's put up, the monster start against the Rockies 3 starts ago. He had a strong start, 6 innings, 8 strikeouts against Miami last time out. I think he's one of the best pitching plays here just because, he has one of the highest strikeout percentages on the slate, even if you account for the fact that he's struggled over the last couple of months since the foreign substance crackdown. He still gets enough strikeouts where he's going to look like a good option against Arizona. The only real concern I would have is that he is pulling 38% ownership. I don't necessarily think he should be twice as owned as Luis Garcia or almost twice as owned as Caprillion, for example. But just looking at Musgrove, I do think it's a very good spot, and I expect to get to plenty.
Yeah, and it's like we said, I mean, it's good to see also his spin rates bounce back a little bit, and he had all kinds of concerns with that after the foreign substance crackdown. But still, Joe Musgrove, we've seen better results from him. And once again, it's another easy matchup. Here have been his recent starts. He had one difficult one against Oakland, but other than that, 2 starts against the Marlins, 2 starts against the Rockies at home, and then 2 starts against what's left of the Washington Nationals offense. The guy just, like you said, easiest strength of schedule in the league right now, continually going up against easy offenses. So I think Joe Musgrove, one of the safer pitching options today. And there's going to be a spot where I think we're going to have to make decisions where he finally faces a good team. But we haven't seen that for a minute. So it's not something that's really a concern.
One thing that stands out recently that I think is encouraging with Musgrove is it seemed like the biggest issue he was having post foreign substance crackdown was with control/command. His spin rate hadn't really changed one way or the other, but his walk rate had gone up, his strikeout percentage had gone down, his home runs, per 9 had gone up. So to me, it seemed like he probably, 1, he was throwing more balls and walking guys, but 2, probably missing within the strike zone more often as well. Over his last 4 starts, he's walked 1, 3, and 1. Granted, the 3 was against the only real offense he faced, so maybe this is just the same guy. He's faced really bad offenses, but it is, I think, reason for optimism that in 3 of his last 4 starts, he's only walked 1 guy.
All right. On the other side, Tyler Gilbert is going to be on the mound facing the San Diego Padres. And with the Padres, I have not targeted them all that much ever since they lost Tatis. And on the other side, Tyler Gilbert, he's only made 3 appearances this year, pitched a total of 3.2 innings. So I don't expect him to work very deep into the game. Mostly going to be a bullpen game here for the D-backs. So the Padres look about appropriately owned, but I don't really love targeting bullpen type games. So Padres versus what's probably going to be the Diamondbacks bullpen. What do you make of this matchup?
Yeah, I've been getting to the Padres more than I would like lately because, again, I'm with you. I don't like them as much without Tatis, but it just seems like the ownership ends up not being there. Bullpen game, like you said, Tyler Gilbert last pitched August 7th, 2 innings, 2/3 of an inning on the 5th, an inning on the 3rd. So no real reason to think he's going deep. He did throw 6 innings at AAA on July 29th. He was starting games there, but I would guess you're getting like 3 or 4 innings from him at most here. So I think it's a perfectly good spot for the Padres, but I do still put them behind like Oakland. I think I would give an edge to Tampa Bay and even like the Dodgers before I get to the Padres.
Yeah, it's the ownership. I understand our top stacks will sees it as about fair right now, but we'll see where that shakes out later in the game. In the day, my feeling is I'm probably going to be underweight to the field on the Padres. Some of these bullpen games, it's just an issue of a lot of guys that are coming in to pitch 1 to 2 innings, even if they aren't the best relievers in the world. They're still more effective than most back end starting pitchers. And you also run into risk where teams will play the lefty righty game and end up pitch hitting for players in that spot. So as of right now, I'm not massively high on the Padres.
Yeah. The one good thing for the Padres is their lefties hit left-handed pitching well. So you typically don't have to worry, at least for most of those guys, about pinch hits.
Yeah, it's so once again, we'll see where the data lies later in the day. But if this is a team that continues to be somewhere in the neighborhood of close to 10% owned, I'm probably not gonna have all that much of them. I'll go to a team like Oakland and be overweight to them, and that'll be one of the spots that I'm cutting ownership relative to the field. Next game on the slate here, Sammy Long is going to be on the mound for the Giants. Kyle Freeland on the mound for the Rockies. I hate this Giants team. I have futures bets on the Dodgers to win the division after they traded for Max Scherzer and Trey Turner. The Giants never lose. They win every single night. It doesn't matter what situation they're in. They're down 4-0 in the 9th inning. Guess what? The defense is going to make 5 errors against them. The Giants end up coming back to win. It's the most infuriating thing ever. But Kyle Freeland is a guy who I think is a pretty quality starting pitcher. He's also pitched better as of late than he did earlier in the season. So this is going to be a spot with the Giants where I've underrated their offense all year, but they just kind of look about appropriately. Owns me at 5%. I'm not making any kind of massive stand on them.
Yeah, that's how I feel too. It's a massive park upgrade for Kyle Freeland. He's going to let you put the ball in play, and the Giants do have just tons of good hitters in their lineup. The one thing that I kind of hate taking this Giants team against lefties because they always run out the starting lineup that has Austin Slater and Darren Ruff and Solano and Estrada or some combination of those guys. And you just know that if there's high leverage spots later in the game, those guys are getting pinch hit for when you have Alex Dickerson and Mike Yastrzemski on the bench. It just makes way too much sense. So I think that on the one hand, the pricing is really good on guys like Ruff and Slater, but on the other hand, there's a good chance that, at least one of them isn't making it to the end of the game, which makes it a little bit less appealing. I think Chris Bryant's fine. I think Buster Posey's fine. But yeah, I'm with you overall. I just think the Giants look like they're getting the ownership they deserve. I don't feel strongly one way or the other. If I get, 5% of the Giants, I'm cool with that. I'd be surprised if I get like 10% or something.
And then on the other side, Sammy Long is going to be pitching for the Giants. Anybody going up against the Rockies, it's always a favorable matchup, especially when the Rockies are on the road. But Sammy Long has been priced up to $8K on DK, and then over on FanDuel, Sammy Long also is priced up to a point where it's $6,700, which obviously that's not a substantial price point. But the issue with Sammy Long is he doesn't work very deep into games. So DK is a little bit expensive. FanDuel, I don't expect them to be able to get the quality start bonus. Probably not going to be able to be eligible for the win bonus either. So no real interest in the Rockies for me because they suck. And then no interest in me from Sammy Long because I don't think he's stretched out enough.
Yeah, same boat. If I thought Sammy Long was going to give us 5 or 6 innings, I'd be interested. He's put up really good strikeout numbers over a limited sample this year. But he, even at AAA recently, August 10th, I lost it. August 10th, he threw. Where'd it go? He went like 2 innings in his last start and like 1 the one before that. August 10th, 1 inning. August 5th, 2 2/3. So no real reason for optimism on him going deep here, I don't think.
Yeah, that's the Sammy Long, fine enough pitcher, but most likely it's going to be a game where the Giants have to rely on their bullpen. Bad spot for the Rockies. Not looking to get to Sammy Long either. Next game on the slate, Luis Garcia going up against the Los Angeles Angels. It's not the easiest matchup in the world because the Angels, while their offense is weaker than was expected coming into the season, no Rendon, no Mike Trout, it's still not a team that strikes out a ton. And it's also still, you have to match up against Shohei Ohtani, so that could be an issue at time. But the real thing with Luis Garcia is just the ownership relative to some of the other top pitchers on the slate. He's not picking up the same kind of ownership. So Luis Garcia, who's also been priced down on FanDuel, $7,900. That's a favorable price point. Over on DK, Luis Garcia more appropriately priced at $9,900, but only 12% owned. So on paper, not the best spot. Then you look at the ownership where we have him as the third most likely pitcher to be top scoring pitcher on the slate. And he's picking up about a third of the ownership of the other guys in this price range.
I really, really, really like Garcia here. The Angels are actually a team I've really liked picking on recently because since they called up Brandon Marsh and Joe Adell, there are just way, way, way more strikeouts in this lineup than there used to be. Kind of going through it. Like, yeah, Shohei Ohtani, we know, is a great great hitter. He's also struck out 30% of the time this year. So even though, you're not saying, oh, great, like Ohtani's in the lineup, it's still a guy that strikes out. Fletcher doesn't strike out. Jared Walsh is at like 28%. Max Stassi's at 30%. Brandon Marsh has struck out almost 40% of the time since being called up. Joe Adell has struck out almost 40% of the time going back to being called up last year. Then you get to the bottom of the order with Eaton and Iglesias, which are relatively difficult strikeouts. But the middle of this order just suddenly went from a team that was tough to strike out, where you had Anthony Rendon in there, and earlier you had Trout. Now you just have these guys that strike out 30+% of the time, back to back to back to back, going up against the pitcher with the second highest strikeout percentage on the slate. This is the one that really stands out. I have no idea why Dylan Cease is getting twice the ownership against the Yankees that Luis Garcia is getting against this Angels team.
Yeah, and Luis Garcia, I guess people are just looking at the earned runs allowed in some of his recent starts, but I mean, if you look at the actual numbers, they've been pretty solid. His last handful of starts, 8 strikeouts, no walks, 7 strikeouts, 2 walks, 9 strikeouts, 1 walk, 8 strikeouts, no walks. So Luis Garcia, the underlying numbers look really good for him, and the ownership is just too low. So as long as that holds, he's a pretty high priority play for me in this price range. I certainly want to be overweight to him. And then before we were talking about maybe want to stack the Yankees for leverage against Dylan Cease, that's the pivot play to make, in my opinion. Take some of that Dylan Cease ownership and put it to Luis Garcia. I think that's a good pivot to make. And then on FanDuel, he's just priced incorrectly at 7,900.
The only thing about Garcia, like, that is kind of a red flag to me is they do seem to have a pretty quick hook on him. Like, he's normally giving you like 85 to 88 pitches. So you can probably get, like, if he's pitching well and Cease is pitching well, for example, you probably can get like one more inning from Cease. But that's still one of those things I'm not going to harp on too much because, if Garcia is really dominating, they probably let him go a little bit deeper anyway. So it's kind of nitpicking to me. I just really like Garcia at this ownership.
Yeah, and then on the other side, the Houston Astros going up against the Angels. This is basically going to be the same stuff for me that we said about the Red Sox earlier, and I assume the same for you, where the Astros clearly a great spot. I don't think Jaime Barria is any good, but the Astros are picking up way too much ownership as a team than what's warranted. Over on FanDuel, they're negatively leveraged. On DraftKings, they're also massively negatively leveraged. So good spot for the Astros, but there's just never going to be a spot on a slate this large where I think any one individual team warrants 18% ownership.
Yeah, exactly. I love the spot for the Astros. In cash, I assume I'm getting to $3,100 Brantley, probably $4,300 Alvarez. Might just make it a full Houston outfield with Tucker as well. Really, really good spot for these guys. And DraftKings just completely missed the boat on their pricing. And that's why the ownership's as high as it is. But when you're playing tournaments, you're playing against your opponents. You're not trying to just put together the highest projected team that you can. And when you know that teams in this situation are just going to get tons of ownership because they're so easy to get to, the math just plays out where, over the course of the season, you're going to make more money by going to some other teams. Like, for example, right now we have Houston with basically 1.1 times the chance of being the top stack is Oakland, but they're getting 3 times the ownership. That doesn't make any sense if you're trying to win a tournament, to be going to Houston over Oakland, given those numbers. Tampa Bay, they're basically Houston's like 1.3x or 1.2x. I'm not that good at doing math quickly, but something like that. And they're getting 3 times the ownership. There's a lot of situations like that where you can just look at the math and understand that if you consistently take this approach, it doesn't feel good because Houston is clearly a phenomenal team tonight. But if you just consistently take this approach, you're going to lose some slates, but you're going to get bigger payouts on the slates that you do win.
Yeah, and it's just a matter of we have the Houston Astros with an 11.2% chance to be the top scoring team today. We have the Oakland A's with a 10.3% chance. So all things considered, that's very similar odds to be the top scoring team of the day. However, Oakland 6.4% projected ownership, 17.7% going to the Houston Astros. So the Astros are 3x owned against a team that have comparable odds being scoring at the same upside. So spots to get away from. It's one of these, I think I'm just gonna call them like clench your butthole spots because it's clearly a good spot on paper, but relative to ownership, I don't like it. That's how I feel about the Red Sox. On the early slates, how I feel about the Astros. I just hope they're not the highest scoring team. I hope it's anybody else, and then it'll be an okay situation.
I wish it was the first game on the slate. It's so much nicer when like when you're watching the slate and you're just like, okay, it's over, I can go do whatever, or you're like, the Astros failed, like I'm so live on all these lineups. It sucks when you're like, oh, I'm like doing really well in tournaments. Oh, the Astros game doesn't start for 2 hours.
Yeah, and there's going to be lineups where it's for sure. It's like, oh, cool, this team scored 7 runs, and this is the top stack of the day. It's like, well, the Houston Astros might come and score 10 runs, and those lineups don't even end up cashing. So we'll see where that goes. Right now, though, Houston Astros current data we have, and by the way, MLB main slate ownership that is free over at Awesemo.com. You can see all the ownership that's going to Houston tonight, but spot that we're both going to be underweight to as of now. Final game on the slate, one that I don't have a whole bunch of interest in. Yusei Kikuchi on the mound for Seattle, Hyunjin Ryu on the mound for Toronto. Both pitchers, they're just kind of whatever to me on this slate. I'm always willing to stack the Blue Jays when they have lowish ownership, but not a high priority stack for me. But overall, this is one of the least interesting games from a DFS perspective for me.
I do like the Jays here. I think I'd rather get to the Jays than like Tampa Bay, just because I think that they're getting a little bit less ownership, and I just really like Toronto's offense. It is, a negative park downgrade for them, but Kikuchi has had some power issues with righties this year. 203 actual ISO, 188 expected ISO. And it's just, anytime I can get to low owned Springer, Guerrero, Semien, Bichette, I like to do so. And this is another one of those teams where I think they just end up going a little bit under owned because, people are going to choose to go to the very good cheap Astros or the very good cheap Royals or Cardinals or whatever. So I do like Toronto here. It's a tough matchup with Kikuchi, but I just love how much talent there is. And they also are starting Alejandro Kirk at catcher quite a bit now, who is just another potent bat that they have.
Yeah, a little bit under-owned Toronto Blue Jays offense. So I don't mind getting overweight to them just because of the low ownership, but still there's a bunch of lower-owned offenses that are going to be higher priorities for me than Toronto today. Of course, the main one, which I've mentioned a few times today, is going to be the Oakland A's. But other than that, we've hit everything, all games for the main slate, all games for the early slate. Any closing thoughts you have here, Adam, before we sign off?
No, I think it looks like two pretty fun slates. So looking forward to it.
All right, that is going to do it for us today, guys. Do us a favor, like the video, subscribe to the YouTube channel, stick around. We've got plenty of content coming up today. MLB Live Before Lock and NFL Preseason Live Before Lock.